The movie begins with a lone humanoid alien who is seen undergoing a ritual at the top of a waterfall. The humanoid alien takes out a cup of dark liquid and drinks from it, causing his body to decompose into particles of DNA after falling to the water. Tens of thousands of years later, in 2089, two archaeologists from Earth named Dr. Elizabeth Shaw and Dr. Charlie Holloway step into a cave in Scotland. The couple discovers an ancient marking which they call a star map, bringing them in awe and fascination. The two think of this as an encouragement and an invitation from humanity's pioneers and creators, known as the engineers, to come and find them. Inside a highly advanced space vessel called the Prometheus, a crew ventures to locate the engineers through the star maps discovered by Shaw and Holloway. This expedition is funded by Peter Weyland of the Weyland Industries. His daughter, Meredith Vickers, leads their voyage while the reliable android named David has monitored the ship's crew throughout their journey on their way to their destination, LV-223. The entire crew of Prometheus has traveled to space through a stasis, a process in which their whole body's normal flow is stopped with cryogenics. After a 2-year sleep, Vickers, Shaw, Holloway, and the rest of the crew all wake up when they arrive at their destination in December 2093. The crew consists of experts from various fields of science and technology. David assists them during their awakening, and the crew all meet and gather for the first time in 2 years. Vickers notices Janik, the captain and main pilot of the Prometheus, as he enthusiastically sets up a Christmas tree to commemorate the holidays. During their mission briefing, Weyland delivers a message to orient the crew. Besides, he introduces David, his recreation, as his son who will never grow old and die. Dr. Shaw and Dr. Holloway also explain their discoveries. They show images of their archaeological digs from all over the Earth, in which men look up to the sky, worshipping giant beings from above. Using their accumulated star maps, the couple introduces their search for the engineers' living place. This study has brought them to explore the LV-223. Some of their shipmates question their theory, given the accumulated knowledge throughout history regarding the beginning of humanity. Nonetheless, Shaw expresses her firm belief in their research. During the evening, David summons Shaw and Holloway through the orders of Vickers. They come to her office, where she tells both of them about her doubts regarding the existence of the engineers. Despite that, she makes it clear to them that they cannot make any contact with the engineers without her approval. The captain of Prometheus, Janik, also allows the ship's landing as the crewmates brace themselves. Ford, the ship's medic, briefly studies the composition of LV-223. She learns that the oxygen levels are insufficient on that planet and realizes that they're dead within 2 minutes without a suit. Then, they reach a desolate and mountainous area. The survey team suits up in preparation for their exploration. Holloway asks David why he is wearing a suit when he is an android that does not breathe. David casually explains that it is because he wants to look more like a real person and make others to be at ease around him. The survey team makes their way into the mountainous surface, where they discover structures that are in straight lines and perfect shapes. Holloway later finds that while the air outside the LV-223 is toxic, the air on the mountainous surface is breathable. They tell him not to remove his headgear, but he carries on and finds it able to breathe normally. The rest of the crew remove their headgear, suspecting that something is manufacturing breathable air in the area. In their exploration, they also utilize a mapping device to scope the entirety of the planet. The mapping device scans through the mountainous surface, and the place's overall structure is illustrated through a hologram in the ship's control room. As they explore deeper in the mountainous surface, they come across a decapitated corpse of what seems to be an alien. One of the crew members, named Fifield, slowly withdraws out of fright at all the discovery while David tries to read the texts on the walls. He walks away with their shipmate, Milburn, and they decide to go back to Prometheus. Holloway, Ford, and David continue inside a room and are welcomed by the sight of a huge statue of a humanoid head. The room also contains a number of cylinder-shaped stones, as well as a few corpses from unidentified creatures. David catches sight of a dark liquid coming out of the stone, and he is tempted to touch it. Just then, Shaw reminds everyone to be careful not to touch anything inside the room. Even so, David ends up curiously touching the dark liquid that leaks out of the cylinder-shaped stone. Suddenly, Shaw senses the air structure slowly changing inside the room, along with the murals on the mountain's ceiling. Therefore, she quickly collects the alien skull with Ford and puts it in a bag to bring along with them. Meanwhile, Janek and his team of pilots detect an incoming storm and urge the survey team to come back to the ship. David secretly recovers one of the cylinder-shaped stones and stores it in his bag before leaving with the crew. The crew rushes to get back to Prometheus as they race against the storm behind them. Shaw gets caught in a storm while trying to salvage the humanoid head that fell, but Holloway and David come to her rescue. While the survey team manages to return, Milburn and Fifield get lost inside the mountainous surface while on their way back to the ship. Janek detects a new life force inside the mountainous surface, informing Milburn and Fifield. The two check the location of the life force through Janek's instructions but find nothing. Unable to do anything at the moment, Janek instructs them to stay suited inside the mountainous surface while they wait for the storm to pass. Back in Prometheus, Shaw and Ford study the alien head and uncover that it is a helmet and not a skull. With the help of David, they lift the helmet up and find an actual head inside. Shaw becomes thrilled upon seeing the head, believing that it belongs to an engineer. Ford makes an incision to trigger its nervous system as the head slowly comes alive. It leaks out the black liquid, which is the same as before in the cylinder-looking stone, and produces an unusual odor, causing them to immediately contain the head. Shaw insists on continuing their study, so she orders Ford to collect more samples from the head. Later, David communicates briefly with Wayland using high-tech headgear. Vickers notices it and interrupts David, asking him about their conversation. David refuses to tell, and as a consequence, Vickers drags him in a corner and strangles him. David does not feel threatened, but ends up telling her Wayland's command to him is to work hard. In fact, Wayland orders him to test the effect of the dark liquid on Holloway. Later, David finds Holloway in a room. He asks Holloway how far he would go to gain his answers, and Holloway replies that he is willing to do anything and everything. Convinced of his answer, David then takes a portion of the dark liquid he retrieved and secretly puts it in Holloway's drink. Without even realizing it, Holloway unconsciously drinks it. Then, he comes to Shaw's cabin. Shaw shows him the matching DNA composition between the engineers and humans, confirming that they indeed came from the engineers. This means that the engineers are the creators of human beings. Holloway says that there is nothing special about the creation of life because anybody can do it. Shaw frowns at the thought, reminding him that she is infertile. He consoles her in an instant, and the two reconcile as they have an emotional moment. At the same time, Vickers arrives in the control room and finds Janek. Due to her indifferent and dismissive nature, Janek asks Vickers if she is a robot. In reply, Vickers tells him to come to her room, leaving the control room empty. Inside the mountainous structure, Milburn and Fifield discover the room containing the cylinder-shaped stones. The dark fluid has begun to leak rapidly out of each stone while the two explore them. Suddenly, a long snake-looking creature slowly approaches Milburn and Fifield. They contact the control room but get no response from anyone, including Janek. The creature tightens its grasp on Milburn and breaks his arm. Fifield tries to cut the creature off Milburn, but it splashes venomous fluid that quickly damages Fifield's helmet. The creature penetrates through Milburn's protective suit and kills him, while Fifield dies in the dark liquid. The storm passes the following day, therefore Prometheus comes back to the mountainous structure. Holloway wakes up feeling an odd sensation and finds his eyes slowly reddening. At the same time, Shaw wakes up to a call from Janek about losing track of Milburn and Fifield. The survey team drives with Janek back to the mountainous surface to fetch them. David, on the other hand, is instructed by Janek on a separate mission to track the life force he had detected in the control room earlier. From the Prometheus, Vickers tells David to uplink his feed to her room, permitting her to see the inside of the place remotely. David comes across the crew's mapping device and learns that it is stuck on a door. He He lifts the door, allowing the mapping device to enter a room which is revealed to be the innermost center of the mountainous surface. At this time, David disconnects his feed and cuts Vickers' remote access, angering her. David studies the room with interest, able to see a hologram of the engineers as he watches them in action. He learns through the hologram that the mountainous surface is actually the engineer's ship. Just when he finds out that the ship has set its destination on Earth, the hologram shuts off. His gaze heads towards a huge chamber which carries a living engineer under stasis. On the other side, Janek and the survey team continue their search for their two shipmates. They return to the room with the cylinder stones and notice the large amount of black liquid leaking from it. The crew is startled upon seeing Milburn's corpse, while Ford steps in to check his body. At this moment, Holloway suddenly falls. His eyes continue to worsen and an infection is suspected. Shadow calls the attention of Janek to get him treated. Just then, the snake-looking creature inside Milburn resurfaces and kills one of the crew members before escaping. Shaw halts their search for Fifield and Milburn, communicating with Vickers to send in a medical team for them. The black liquid uncontrollably seeps into Holloway's body, and he struggles in his suit. The survey team stops short just outside the ship's back door. Janek commands the door to be opened, but Vickers refuses to follow him. On the contrary, she wears her protective suit and brings out a flamethrower. She informs the survey team that Holloway is no longer allowed to board the Prometheus due to his threatening condition. Janek argues with her, saying that Holloway is a sick shipmate who needs to be treated immediately. However, Vickers is firm with her decision as she orders the rest of the crew except Holloway to go back on the ship. Shaw continuously pleads with Vickers to reconsider, but ends up in vain. Holloway distances himself from the crew, implying that he is fine with Vickers' decision. He consoles Shaw and bids goodbye to her before letting Vickers burn him to death. Shaw cries in agony at the sight and faints, then wakes up on a table where David conducts a quarantine failsafe to her. After a quick checkup, David reveals to her that she is 3 months pregnant. Hearing the result, Dr. Shaw startles in shock. She tells David that she is infertile and that it would be impossible. He admits to her that the fetus is of a different kind, making her plead to him in panic. He offers her to be put under stasis again until they return to Earth, but Shaw insists on taking the creature out of her body immediately. David tells her that there are no personnel in the ship capable of performing surgery on her. Right then, Shaw shouts because of the aching pain in her stomach. As a result, David tranquilizes her and puts her back on the table. Ford arrives after a while to put her back in stasis. With the tranquilizer wearing off, Shaw begins to make a resistance. She runs to the ship's medical pod and prepares to perform a surgery on herself. She quickly settles in the pod as the creature begins to move inside her belly. The medical pod proceeds with the automated surgery, initiating anesthetics. It cuts her belly open, revealing a squid-like creature lingering inside her. As the surgery continues, the creature is successfully extracted from her before it stitches her abdomen closed. Shaw gets out of the room in an instant and locks the creature inside of the medical pod. Meanwhile, Janek communicates with the other crew members after locating Fifield's monitor just outside the Prometheus. They open the ship's back door and find a mutated Fifield who has been consumed by the dark liquid. Fifield monstrously attacks the crew members on the back door and mercilessly kills them. Janek uses a flamethrower to kill him while the other crew members crush him with a military vehicle. During this time, Shaw stumbles upon an unfamiliar room where she sees Weyland and his team. She later learns that Weyland has undergone stasis and has boarded the Prometheus with them. In addition, she finds out about David's encounter with the last living engineer. Weyland finally discloses that he trusts in her research, which is why he approved of funding the whole expedition. He also believes that through the help of the engineers, he can find a way to live forever. It is Weyland's ultimate goal to gain eternal life. Weyland prepares to meet with the engineer, leaving Shaw dazed and confused. She goes back to her cabin to compose herself as Janek comes to visit her. Janek asks her about her plans, asserting that their supposed destination, the LV-223, was not the home of the engineers, but was rather a military facility. He tries to persuade her into going back to Earth despite the questions left unanswered. In response, she tells him that a living engineer has been discovered, indicating that they are close to getting their answers. Later, Vickers finally meets with her father, Wayland, while in the middle of wearing his protective suit. Vickers explains to him the danger of going to the mountainous surface. While Wayland argues with her, Vickers tries to make him realize that death is inevitable for everyone, including him. Wayland chooses to meet the engineer despite his daughter's warning. He departs the ship together with David, Ford, and Shaw. Inside the mountainous surface core, they uncover a large amount of the cylinder-shaped stones surrounding them. From the Prometheus, Janek studies the structure of the mountainous surface, where he concludes that it is, in fact, a gigantic ship. The mechanics of the entire ship have impressed David, and he leads them to their destination. David wakes the last living engineer from stasis, and they all stare while he gets up from his chamber. The crew falls into a frenzy while they bombard him with questions. David speaks by using the engineer's language and addresses the concerns of Wayland, asking if the engineer knows any way to live immortally. But all of a sudden, the engineer beheads David and his head is separated from his body. They all watch in surprise at the engineer's attack and rush to stop him. The engineer grabs Ford and tosses her away, and then she's dead. He kills Wayland and the rest of the crew except Dr. Shaw, who has barely succeeded in running away. Wayland lays lifeless beside the still functional David, and David bids farewell to Wayland, who he considers his father and creator. Vickers watches everything from their ship and ultimately decides to abort the mission. Janek follows her and prepares Prometheus on his flight back to Earth. Later, the engineer revives the huge spacecraft and resumes the original mission of going to Earth while David's still functional head watches him. The impact of the spacecraft's reactivation throws Shaw outside, where she flees toward the Prometheus. She relays the crew the engineer's plans for releasing the dangerous dark liquid on Earth. After all that Shaw has been through, she believes that the engineers hate human beings, and that they plan to travel to Earth to kill all human beings using the dark liquid. As a result, she pleads to Janek to stop the engineer from going to their planet. Janek becomes torn as Vickers orders him to dismiss Shaw and leave the place immediately. Eventually, Janek decides to listen to Shaw and willingly chooses to sacrifice his life for the sake of Earth. He ends the discussion with Vickers, setting up the escape pod for her and the rest of the crew. His co-pilots decide to join him while Vickers runs her way to the escape pod. Janek and the pilots generate a powerful force enough to turn Prometheus into a bullet. The ship ejects its lifeboats while Vickers boards the escape pod and successfully makes it out of the Prometheus. At this time, the Prometheus crashes onto the engineer's spacecraft, creating a huge explosion and causing it to crash on the ground. Shaw and Vickers witness the collision before they hurriedly run away from the massive impact, with big lumps of heavy metal falling all over the place. Shaw is able to roll away in time, but Vickers gets crushed by the spacecraft and she's killed. Shaw becomes the sole human survivor from the entire crew of Prometheus. However, she soon breathes with difficulties as a result of her damaged spacesuit. She rushes to a nearby lifeboat where she is able to stabilize her breathing. Inside, she finds the room containing her squid-looking offspring that has rapidly increased in size. David's operative head is able to reach Dr. Shaw, and he relays a warning about the engineer. He tells her that the engineer is coming for her and that she needs to get out of the lifeboat. Just then, the engineer arrives, aggressively opening the door to the lifeboat. The engineer attacks her, and in defense, she frees her squid-looking offspring. The squid-looking offspring strangles the engineer's throat and holds it in control as Shaw runs out of the lifeboat with a working spacesuit. She lies on the ground while staring in the sky, bursting with agony at the mission's downfall. After a while, David calls out to her, asking for her help in retrieving his remains. Shaw is unwilling, but comes for him after he offers a way out of the LV-223. She returns to the alien spacecraft for David, and while he discusses a possible pathway back to Earth, she interrupts him. Rather than going back, she aims to reach the home place of the engineers to finish their mission and ultimately seek for answers. The two team up, and together, they depart the LV-223 in a new ship controlled by David. The movie ends with Shaw making a final report of the ship, Prometheus, during New Year's Day. She reports that she is the last survivor of Prometheus and is still in search of the engineers. She also states that the ship and the entire crew are gone, warning the listeners not to make any attempts on coming to the LV-223. Back in the lifeboat, an alien creature mutates out of the engineer, signifying a possibility of another encounter between the aliens and the humans. The movie unfolds in the year 2071 in the city of Moscow. The surroundings depict how the planet Earth has greatly suffered from the intergalactic war fueled by Cherno, an evil scientist who dreams of conquering the entire universe. He is regarded as the most dangerous prisoner, turning his experiments as weapons that threaten lives. 20 years after the war, the humans, also known as Earthlings, still face hardships and struggle to sustain their basic needs. Anton, a young male Earthling, waits in a long line of humans to refill his water supply when a mysterious figure from the shadows intentionally manipulates a metal pole to collapse from behind him. Anton manages to evade the falling pole, but it creates a commotion in the area. The humans in line stare at him in dismay, accusing him of being plagued by bad luck out of the annoyance at the continuous accidents involving him. Meanwhile, the mysterious figure who turns out to be Cherno's daughter, Valia, reports back to her father in his gigantic spaceship-turned-prison. Valia's consistent failed attempts to stimulate Anton's DNA upsets Cherno. His latest invention, called the protogene, a combination of unique cells, is about to run out. The last remaining protogene is revealed to be within Anton's DNA, and it serves as the only key to his freedom. As a result, Cherno continually pressures her to keep on pursuing Anton and kill him for good, to which Valia feels heavily burdened. While Cherno's prison resides in the Earth's deep underground, another huge spaceship hovers right above it inside the city. This spaceship is displayed as a dandelion-shaped stadium that caters to a high-risk flying sport known as Cosmoball. In this sport, intergalactic teams of 4 must kick the destructive ball of energy called Wave Eater 5 times to open their opposing team's goal and score a point. 3 gifted humans, Fan, Natasha, and Pelly, make up the Team Earthlings, in which they all skillfully strike their opponent's goal open amidst being outnumbered. The game is broadcasted everywhere above the skies of the Earth in big holographic scenes, serving as the humans' greatest source of entertainment. On the contrary, Anton is frustrated at the impact brought by Cosmoball to the humans. He calls them out for being too immersed in a game when there are far better things to focus on, such as getting a job and dealing with hunger. Back in the stadium, the Earthlings and their current opponent, the Cerusians, both succeed at opening their opposing goal zones. Stan, a star player of the Cerusians, strikes a goal and they take the lead against the Earthlings by 1. In fact, the Wave Eater is one of Cherno's inventions. In the midst of transporting another Wave Eater to the playing field, Cherno successfully intercepts the transfer and instead tosses the wave towards the machines. A few machines smash to bits, severely injuring the guards in the process. This urges Bello, the head of the Galactic Cosmoball League, to momentarily halt the game and inform the players about the sudden technical difficulty. The guards regain control of the Wave Eater, and the game resumes as soon as the ball reaches the playing field. Though the game ends in a draw, it is the first time in history that the Earthlings triumphantly make their way to the finals, earning a loud cheer from the human spectators in and out of the stadium. Cherno, on the other hand, shouts in anguish at the sight of his creation turning into lumps of rock. The night emerges and Anton comes home to his sick mother. He finds out that his mom has been lying about her medical supply and pretends to be fine. Anton rushes to the pharmacy, where he comes across a young woman named Anya. The two of them break into the pharmacy to steal some food and medical supplies, but the alarm immediately catches the attention of the police. 2 police officers, led by Captain Vasily, catch up to them. Anton pretends to surrender alone and distracts the officers while Anya remains hidden. He manages to create an opening by distracting them and is able to run away. Just then, Anton runs and crashes onto a rushing vehicle, causing him to shout in panic. Vasily checks the front of the truck only to find nothing else but the stolen medicine spilled all over the floor. They leave the place in confusion, while Valia, who has effectively concealed herself as the driver of the truck, grins in satisfaction. Later, It is revealed that Anya is also Valia, who has been following Anton all this time. Anton's fear has activated the proto-gene and his teleportation ability for the first time, as he teleports uncontrollably a few miles away from his previous location. Disguised as Anya, Valia lures Anton to her basement and captures his attention through their common interests, such as their shared dislike for Cosmoball and their desire to help their sick parents. Anton listens intently, oblivious of why Anya pulls a few strands of his hair to collect a portion of the proto-gene from his DNA. Anya brings the hair strands to her father. However, the proto-gene barely responds because of the inadequate amount. Meanwhile, Anton comes back home surprised at the sight of Bello and the Team Earthlings in their house. Bello confirms Anton's teleportation ability and expresses his interest in recruiting him as the fourth player of the Team Earthlings. Anton strongly declines, telling them that he does not like Cosmoball and that he has to take care of his sick mom. Natasha steps in and insists on finding a cure for his sick mom in exchange for his approval. She convinces both Bello and Anton, and they seal the deal with a handshake. Anton is instantly brought to the stadium ship, where he marvels at every sight. During his checkup, Bello takes a sample of Anton's genetic material in order to generate his very own Sputnik, a droid that will serve as his gear and buddy during the games. Everyone from Team Earthling owns a Sputnik that caters to their respective body composition. Anton slightly struggles in the first few minutes of training, but does not take long to control his teleportation abilities. He adjusts to the abilities quickly enough for Bello and the Team Earthlings to observe a situation that they have never encountered. Deep in thought, Bello instructs Anton to play for the first two games the next day and resume his training afterwards. Bello leaves with Natasha afterwards to meet with the Galactic Council and talk about a possible cure for Anton's mother. The Council displays their contempt in the thought of helping Anton and his mother's intergalactic infection, but Bello firmly insists on going by the deal. He regards Anton as the most gifted athlete after having seen his performance on the first day of training. Natasha spends time with Anton and expresses her fondness of him every chance she gets, which bewilders Anton most of the time. On another note, Valia, who has shapeshifted as her alternate identity Anya, captures Anton's attention through their shared dislike for Cosmoball and the same intention of finding a cure for her father. She takes advantage of Anton by giving him a poisonous pod that can possibly destroy the stadium ship and end Cosmoball for good. Anton's Sputnik arrives at the scene with Natasha to fetch him. Before they leave, Anya gives Anton a peck on the lips and slips the pod on his hand while Anton's Sputnik eyes Anya suspiciously. On their way back to the stadium ship, Anton grows interested in his Sputnik. Natasha tells him that Sputniks warn their owner on potential threats and may or may not activate battle mode depending on the probability of danger. Another game of Cosmoball commences the following day. The poisonous pod stays undetected even after going through inspection. The Team Earthlings link with their Sputniks to gear up for the game. Anton, who is warily holding the poisonous pod in his hand, gets it stuck beneath his glove. Anton talks to his Sputnik and removes the glove, and Anton uses his hand to squeeze the poisonous pod, and its sap spreads across the stadium ship's floor. Anton nonchalantly walks away after following Anya's orders and enters the waiting area. As the athletes enter the playing field, Anton finds himself surrounded by a large crowd full of welcoming cheers. Back in his house, his mom watches the game together with Vasily, looking healthier than ever from the continuous medications. Soon, the players get into position and start the game. Anton, on the other hand, sits on the ground and ignores the entire game, causing the audience to call him a quitter. Bello pauses the game to summon Anton, attempting to talk some sense into him. He shows Anton the entire machinery inside the stadium ship and explains how Cosmoball is more than just a game. He tells Anton about the war, Cherno, the Wave Eater, and his last invention, which is the proto-gene. Ultimately, he says to Anton that being an athlete allows him to give his fellow Earthlings something to hope for amidst their current situation. Anton eventually realizes the repercussions of his action and runs back to retrieve the poisonous pod that he dropped, only to find that it has already seeped into a portion of the ship's stadium. He comes back to the playing field and shouts that the stadium has been infected, but to no avail as the game goes on. Bello fortunately notices him and reacts quickly by freezing the infected area. The poison continues to spread, and the stadium ship goes into emergency evacuation mode in order to protect the audience. Natasha arrives to free the remaining audience stuck inside when the Wave Eater dashes toward her direction. Anton sees this and races to her aid before the athletes kick the Wave Eater 5 times, which results in its meltdown. He loses consciousness from being hit by the Wave Eater, but he wakes up not long after. Then he immediately goes to confront Anya in her basement, yet as soon as their eyes meet, she stuns Anton and shows him her true form as Valya while confessing her admiration towards him. Even so, she is disappointed in him for not completely destroying the stadium ship and begins to collect a moderate amount of protogene in his DNA before leaving him unconscious. Anton's Sputnik hurriedly looks for him after sensing the threat. Finding him lying unconscious, his Sputnik connects with him and ends up exhausting itself to heal Anton's injury. At the same time, Cherno acquires the protogene from Valya and begins his escape plan. Through the protogene, Cherno summons another one of his creations, a gigantic puppy-like creature. He links himself with the creature to gain full control and uses it as a spaceship. The protogene in his possession also grants him the ability to teleport his way out. After a while, Anton wakes up and sees Natasha and Bello beside him. Somewhere inside the same basement, Bello hears Cherno calling his name. Cherno addresses Bello as his creator and invites him to join forces with him. Natasha becomes confused upon hearing this. She questions him up front, but Bello shrugs her off. Along with the Cerusians and Amazonians, they all gather outside and briefly encounter Cherno as he successfully escapes and teleports out of planet Earth. Meanwhile, the athletes stay on guard throughout the city while Bello informs the Galactic Council. He also reveals the closely guarded secret about Cosmoball to everyone. They learn that Cosmoball is not a game, but a war, and that the stadium ship is built to prevent the destruction of the planet. Back in his home, Anton's mom comes to tell him that the athletes are leaving for the war against Cherno, but Anton lies down wearily and disheartened from the events around him while holding his Sputnik in his embrace. His mom turns to comfort him, saying that on planet Earth, people make mistakes all the time, but there are strong people who try to fix the mistakes they've made. Simultaneously, Bello holds another meeting with the Galactic Council about their plan of action, when Natasha suddenly enters. Natasha is still bugged by what she heard. She persistently asks Bello why Cherno addressed him as his creator. Bello is left with no choice but to explain to her that Cherno is the greatest failure as a fellow scientist. He says that Cherno was forged in his image. He admits his mistakes, thinking that Cherno would assist him like the Sputniks do. He has given him feelings, but has failed in shaping those feelings. Bello and Cherno's falling out has led to the banishment of Cherno and has resulted in the events of the Intergalactic War 20 years back. Outside the planet Earth, Cherno prepares to fire his newly created Wave Eaters from his ship. He reunites with Valya, instructing her to prevent the athletes from leaving the Earth as long as she can. The huge battle ensues immediately after Cherno sends a succession of Wave Eaters to the surface of Earth. At the same time, Fan, Peli, along with the members of the Cerusians and Amazonians, spread out in different positions outside the city in anticipation. They continuously kick at the incoming Wave Eaters, tossing it towards each other to complete the 5 strikes. Outside, the ships of the Galactic Fleet set up a trap for Cherno and his ship through the supervision of Bello. Cherno, on the other hand, nullifies the trap and destroys the ship single-handedly, which is watched by Bello and Natasha in torment. Using the stadium ship, they continue their pursuit on Cherno. In the midst of destroying the Wave Eaters, the athletes begin to feel fatigue. Stan is on the verge of overheating while Fan is injured from being hit by the Wave Eater. Despite that, they push forward. The impact of their swift strike causes some buildings to crash in some areas of the city. It is when Anton alarmingly gets up and witnesses what is happening. He talks earnestly to his Sputnik and fully establishes their connection. Anton later calls his Sputnik's name Mowgli, which finally awakens it. Anton heads out to assist Fan and Peli. He brings injured Fan to safety with the help of their fellow Earthlings. The residents of the city of Moscow find shelter against the falling debris, including Anton's mom and Vasily, who has developed a romantic relationship after hanging out together on several occasions. Up in the sky, 2 wave eaters in a row rush towards Anton's direction. He manages to strike the first one, but fails to notice the second one, which drags him towards the ground. He lands safely, but ends up in tattered clothes. His Sputnik, Mowgli, senses the situation and instantly comes to his aid. They happily reconcile and link together, creating Anton's gear for combat. Anton is now able to communicate with the rest of the athletes, and with Mowgli in battle mode, he begins to strike once again in full spirit. He successfully destroys each wave eater with only 1 hit, impressing the rest of the athletes. On the other side, Bello decides to face Cherno head-on. He gives Natasha full control of the ship's stadium, ordering her to go back to Earth and save the others in case he does not make it back alive. Natasha agrees and teleports with Bello inside Cherno's ship, where they arrive to finally confront him. Bello later shows his true form while facing Cherno. They shortly catch up on the 20-year gap, and immediately after, their battle transpires. Cherno sneaks an attack towards Bello, but they quickly catch on. In response, Natasha teleports right in front of Cherno to kick him, but Valya interrupts her. Natasha evades Valya's attack and teleports away. However, Valya captures and stuns her instantly. Cherno aggressively charges at Bello, gloating that he has gotten much stronger than him despite being his creation. Meanwhile, Anton successfully teleports on the Earth's moon with Mowgli, witnessing the moon's sorry state. Mowgli's alarm activates, sensing danger nearby. They head towards the area straight away while thinking of Natasha and Bello. In the ship, Bello angers Cherno after he attacks with balls of ice towards his protogenes. Cherno creates a large shield to protect his creation while Bello continuously attacks. Bello slips up a ball of ice right above the shield, where he directly hits Cherno. The ice spreads around Cherno and it freezes his entire body. When Bello's constant attacks break the shield and almost freeze Cherno's entire creation of protogenes, Valya shapeshifts to Natasha's form and stuns him. Valya currently gains the upper hand, incapacitating both Bello and Natasha before she destroys the ice that has been trapping Cherno. Cherno breaks free and utilizes his elastic gear to strangle Bello. He says his parting words and is about to kill him, but Anton arrives in time. Anton takes Valya hostage against Cherno, making him release his hold on Bello. Cherno walks towards Anton's direction and challenges him as if he can never kill Valya. He mentions that Valya has never been a perfect creation and stabs her in the abdomen himself. Cherno's blade lightly touches Anton's gear, and it pushes him forcefully on the lining of the ship, where he is trapped and unable to teleport. Bello barely manages to keep Cherno distracted by dropping a bead of ice in an attempt to neutralize the power of the ship. The evil Cherno proceeds to direct his makeshift spear towards Bello and kills him instantly. Anton takes the chance to connect with the ship itself through their shared cells. He meets the puppy-like creature and it wildly chases him. As Anton nears the exit, he decides to stop and directly faces the creature instead. The wild creature is taken aback, its limbs coming to a full stop in front of the Earthling. They both stare at each other for a moment, and Anton later protests vehemently at the creature for its threatening behavior. It roars at him in reply before it senses their connection. Pushing further, Anton calms the creature by lightly touching its head. Soon enough, he successfully establishes trust with the creature, enabling him to break free of the lining of the ship. Furthermore, the creature grows fond of Anton, which ultimately destroys its connection from Cherno. Cherno tries to resist and exclaims that he is the master, but the creature no longer listens to him. He is mercilessly ejected out of the ship and tossed onto a massive ball of hot gas, where he melts to death. Natasha regains control of her body after being released from the trap. Anton teleports back to her, and together they return to Earth. On Earth, the citizens have grown tired of hiding. They become determined to survive and gather to fight for humanity. Through Valya's lead, they go to position, ready to fight the wave eaters coming their way, when all suddenly stop and stay in place after Cherno's defeat. Claiming their victory, the residents of the city of Moscow cheer out loud. After some time, the city is brought to better shape under the leadership of Natasha. The energy from the remaining Wave Eaters has been harnessed to restore and improve the way of life on Earth. In her speech, she stresses that it is the time for Earthlings to live, not just arrive. It is broadcasted all over the planet, with everyone honoring Bella's sacrifice. The movie concludes with the Team Earthlings reuniting after Natasha's speech along with Anton's mom, new stepdad Vasily, Mowgli, and the creature who he now calls Kid. During an eclipse in 1957, a priest sneakily enters a church with a newborn baby who has a unique mark on his left chest. The priest lays the crying baby on the altar before he starts praying. As soon as the priest finishes praying, he takes out a dagger and holds it up against the baby, referring to the baby as an evil seed. Just then, militia arrive at the church, ordering the priest to drop his weapon. The priest appeals to the militia, claiming that they do not understand what he is doing. The soldiers are left with no choice but to shoot the priest and rescue the baby afterwards. 30 years later, after the incident, an undercover priest and exorcist who identifies himself as Father Merrick onboards a bus on an eerie-looking highway. He takes out a map and smokes a cigarette before arriving at a church. Merrick is welcomed by a monk named Prior Andrzej as he expresses his gratitude to Merrick for willingly joining them. Merrick looks around inside the church where he sees a number of priests. The prior explains to Merrick that the church is in fact a sanatorium, a place in which people under the influence of the devil are brought in to be healed. Additionally, the priests inside the sanctorium also refer to themselves as monks within a brotherhood and live together inside the facility. The prior introduces Merrick to Brother Dawood, who is known as the resident jack of all trades in the sanatorium. The three of them meet inside an isolated storage area. Dawood offers Merrick rosary beads, but Merrick respectfully declines and insists that he has brought his own rosary. They orient Merrick with the standard procedures at the sanatorium as Dawood proceeds with inspecting Merrick's suitcase. Dawood confiscates Merrick's cigarettes before the prior leads Merrick to his quarters. There is no electricity or phones around the quarters, but the prior relieves Merrick that he will be comfortable during his stay. After his final reminders, the prior soon leaves and Merrick settles inside his room. When Merrick changes his clothes and reveals his chest, a familiar, unusual scar shows, which infers that he is the same infant from the shooting incident 30 years ago. He opens his suitcase and shows a hidden compartment containing a pistol, a flashlight, and other items that were not allowed inside the premises. Merrick also takes out a piece of paper before closing his suitcase, exposing a small newspaper article about a missing woman. The bell tolls right at the moment, calling all monks to gather in the dining area. The prior leads the prayer before the priests start eating their dinner. Merrick stares at the bowl of food, questioningly for its unusual taste and odor. He glances over the other priests, who seem to be eating just fine, and so he eats the strange-looking food. After dinner, Merrick continues his tour around the sanatorium. He comes across several different chambers containing other individuals who are said to be possessed. Inside one chamber, he stumbles upon a woman and a priest inside. Merrick stares at the woman briefly before he returns to his quarters. He then takes a shower. However, during the interval, Merrick does not notice that the crucifix in his room has subtly rumbled. The next day, the prior organizes an exorcism session in the sanatorium. Merrick enters a room full of lit candles along with the rest of the monks. Inside, he discovers that it was the woman he previously saw inside a chamber. She stares blankly at the ceiling while tied on a bed as the monks gather on the corner. Father Piotr, Prior Andrzej's second in command, and also his vice prior, prepares to record the exorcism from the other side of the room. Before they begin the ritual, Prior Andrzej relieves the woman, telling her that she will be healed through their help. Merrick witnesses how the exorcism is performed as the prior sprinkles the woman with holy water. The holy water makes the woman wince as the prior proceeds with the holy prayer. He continues the prayer in Latin, and the other monks follow his lead while the woman slowly moves around the bed. As the prayer intensifies, The woman wildly gets up from the bed and snarls against the prior. The bed shakes fiercely as she continues to wail, shuddering frantically. The prior holds a crucifix against the woman, but she screeches and the crucifix catches fire. After the exorcism, Merrick comes back to his quarters to wash his face. He stares in the mirror for a moment before it shatters in his touch, making him freeze in surprise. Shortly after, the door to his wardrobe mysteriously opens with a low, guttural growl. Merrick leaves his quarters and walks across the hallway of the facility. He discovers a mysterious door on the corner of the hallway and approaches it. Just when he is about to enter the mysterious room, Dawood appears before him. Dawood tells Merrick that he can't enter the room unless the prior invites him, so Merrick obediently leaves the door. During dinner time, the monks continue to eat the strange-tasting food, but Merrick is unable to digest it. He throws up as soon as he returns to his room. Merrick feels an immediate ache coming from his jaw, making him pull out his tooth. When he looks at his tooth, it cracks open, revealing a buzzing fly. He frantically pants and checks his mouth in front of the cracked mirror. Later that night, Merrick comes back in front of the mysterious room. He pulls out a small pointed metal from the cross of his rosary and picks on the lock. The lock clicks open and he enters the room, which is revealed to be the prior's office. Merrick quietly looks into the shelves until he stumbles upon a small hole in the painting. He touches the painting and not long after the wall clatters, displaying a hidden room behind the painting. Merrick finds a small storage containing a number of cassette tapes and a television. He plays a tape showing the recorded video of a woman who was previously exorcised. He later leaves the prior's office and comes back to the room where the exorcism took place. Merrick lingers around the room, where he finds a mechanism that controls the bed and a machine produces the wind inside. He also touches the crucifix that was used and discovers a lighter behind it that initiated its fire. Merrick comes to a realization that the exorcism he had witnessed earlier was staged. He returns to his quarters in confusion and picks up the crucifix on his wall, keeping it concealed inside a cabinet. The prior gathers the monks for another prayer meeting the following day. He calls Merrick in front of the platform to lead their penitential act. Merrick hesitantly steps in front and leads the prayer. The prior tells him to recite the prayer in Latin, and he haltingly obliges while reciting random Latin words. Prior Andrzej interrupts Merrick as he instructs Father Piotr to take over the penitential act instead. While eating their dinner, Merrick unexpectedly ingests strands of hair from another bowl of the strange-looking food. He automatically gags and coughs in the middle of his meal, rushing to spit out the food. When he returns to his quarters, he glances on his side only to find that the crucifix is hung back on his wall. Feeling a sense of danger and anxiety, Merrick then opens his suitcase and takes out the pistol before putting it in his pocket. He also burns the newspaper article about the missing woman. Merrick walks through the halls and lets out an exasperated sigh, unable to understand the strange occurrences inside the sanatorium. He forcefully pulls the chained gates to express his frustration before he catches sight of a few monks digging a grave with a casket outside the sanatorium. Merrick returns to the individual chambers to check on the possessed woman he saw earlier, but only finds the room to be empty. Father Piotr, the vice prior, appears behind Merrick and watches him in the chamber. He requests for his presence in the church while waiting for him in the confessional. They enter the confessional where the two talk in secret. Piotr warns Merrick that the other priests are watching his every step and that it would be dangerous for him to continue on exploring the sanatorium. Merrick reveals to him that he is not a priest nor an exorcist, but an officer of the citizens' militia who went undercover to investigate the missing woman in their area. It was through an anonymous tip that Merrick is sent in disguise to the sanatorium after learning that the missing woman were sent to the place. He further explains that the militia cannot run a normal investigation in the sanatorium because of the shooting incident with a priest 30 years ago. In response, Pyotr reveals to Marek that the possessions and exorcisms are indeed staged in order to get attention and budget from the Vatican. Pyotr leaves Marek with a last warning before leaving the confessional. Later, Marek comes back to his room and looks around for any surveillance. He pushes aside a closet and finds a hole with dark liquid spilling out. Marek touches the liquid and slowly puts his hand into the hole, discovering a peculiar device made with an eyeball and a small bone. Just then, he gags and ends up spitting dark liquid on his floor. He glances at the floor when a buzzing sound intensifies as more flies emerge from the dark liquid he vomited. Marek watches the door for a moment until he turns back and finds a hallucination of his face being soaked by the unknown dark liquid. As the night deepens, he sneaks off to locate the exorcised woman. He goes out to the graveyard and digs through the grave earlier. However, Marek discovers that the casket was empty. Just then, Father Dawood emerges behind him and covers his head with a cloth. When Marek wakes up in his room, he realizes that he is tied to his bed. All his belongings, including his pistol, have been discovered by the monks. Dawood watches him while he struggles against the ropes before the prior enters the room with 4 portions of meat. The prior expresses his disappointment to Marek for their failed collaboration before they proceed to force feed him with 4 portions of meat. Marek gags and ends up losing consciousness during his meal. He wakes up later that night and notices that Dawood has dozed off. In an instant, he untangles himself from the ropes and takes the chance to escape. Dawood shortly wakes up and catches him in the act, leading the two to engage in a wrestle. After much struggle, Marek throws Dawood to the ground and shoots him dead. Before leaving his quarters, Marek notices the bowls that were used earlier for his meat. He sets off in the kitchen to learn more about the strange-tasting food being fed to them. Inside, he discovers a freezer which contains the disfigured bodies of the women he was looking for. Marek soon figures out that he and the monks have been consuming the organs of the women all this time. He bumps against Pyotr in the kitchen, who has come looking for him, and they both stare in shock at the sight. Marek becomes even more determined to escape the sanatorium, but Pyotr calls him over to an ancient library. Pyotr brings out an ancient book and reveals a ritual about the Chosen One. He states that the Chosen One was born during an eclipse and had to be immediately killed using a dagger. If he isn't slain after birth, then the Chosen One will devour 7 sinners and drink the blood of an innocent. As soon as the ritual is complete, the Chosen One will become a demon and will bring upon the end of the world. Pyotr speculates that Marek is the Chosen One and that the prior and the rest of the monks are completing the ritual. It is revealed that Prior Andrzej and the monks are priests that worship Satan and are working on summoning the devil. While Marek scans through the pages, he finds an image of the same appearance as the scar on his left chest. Despite that, he denies the tale out of disbelief, and the two of them devise a plan to escape in the sanatorium. Pyotr offers a plan and mentions a hidden passage that leads outside the monastery, inviting Marek to escape with him. In an attempt to gain his trust, Pyotr also shows Marek the scars he had acquired after supposedly trying to escape from the sanatorium. In the end, Marek trusts Prior and lets him lead the way. He introduces Marek to a small tunnel, and the two of them crawl deep into a cave. Suddenly, they hear a noise from behind, and soon later, Marek is cornered by 2 monks who immobilize him in the process. He turns his head toward Pyotr, realizing that it was all a bait before the monks knock him unconscious. Marek wakes up at the sight of the church monks surrounding him. He is again bound and tied to a wooden pillar, while the prior and the church monks gather in their red cloaks. Prior Andrzej reveals to Marek that he had intentionally brought him to the sanatorium, and the few anonymous tips Marek got actually came from him. The prior apologizes to Marek for the deception, but he also clears out that everything they had done came with good intentions. Prior Andrzej and their brotherhood of church monks believe that God and the devil sit side by side with an understanding. He further explains to Marek that it is not the devil, but the humans who are evil, and that in turn, they have deserved punishment for a long time. The church monks also believe that a gateway to hell exists in the nearby well, leading them to build the sanatorium in the said location. The entire brotherhood has waited for 800 years before Merrick, the Chosen One, came to existence. When the ritual is complete, the devil will emerge from the well and enter Merrick's body. Soon after, the church monks proceed to complete the ritual by acquiring the last requirement, which is the blood of an innocent. They bring over the woman who was previously exorcised, making her kneel before Merrick. Merrick stares down at the woman he has long been looking for, trying to stop the priest from killing her. The priest mercilessly slashes the throat of the woman and collects the gushing blood out of her. Then, they all sip the woman's blood from a bowl before disposing of her. Ultimately, the prior reaches the bowl onto Merrick's mouth and forces him to do the same while he whimpers. The prior leads another prayer as the church monks recite a chant to call upon the devil. But after reciting their chants and completing the ritual, nothing happens. Merrick cackles weakly while Prior Andrzej checks back to Pyotr whether they have missed a step on the ritual. Pyotr reviews the ancient book, but fails to find any more instructions left to do. The two continue to speculate and recall how they did the ritual. When they come to a realization that the ritual has failed, Pyotr becomes upset and subtly blames the prior. As a response to the rest of the church monks, Pyotr admits there was a mistake on their part. He orders them to go back to their quarters and meet the next day like nothing happened. The members grow concerned with Merrick, thinking that the militia will come looking for him soon. Pyotr faces Merrick and apologizes to him before he stabs him with a dagger. He stares at Merrick until he loses consciousness before the church monks untie him. They then drag Merrick towards the well and throw him inside. Later on, the prior drinks out his dissatisfaction at the failed ritual while smoking a cigarette. He goes through the night while drowning his frustration in liquor, failing to notice that the cross in his room has turned upside down. After some time, Pyotr enters his room and finds him wasted. It looks as if he is helping the prior to settle on his bed. However, Pyotr grabs on a pillow and pushes it against the prior's face, suffocating him. The prior chokes and lets out continuous muffled struggles, but Pyotr holds the pillow firmly, killing him. By the following day, the church monks burn the disfigured bodies of the women when suddenly Pyotr calls them to gather in Prior's room. He shows the church monks the dead body of the prior while pretending to mourn his passing. The responsibilities of the prior are now given to Pyotr. Meanwhile, Merrick turns out alive as he awakens at the bottom of the well. He slowly gets up and looks around the well surrounded with bones before his body starts to shake violently. Inside the sanatorium, Pyotr and the church monks recite a prayer for the soul of Prior Andrzej. In the midst of the prayer service, Pyotr shudders as he loses control of his senses. All of a sudden, he drops the ancient book as he is unable to talk any longer or move at his own will. The church monks stare at Pyotr in confusion while he continuously gags. He slowly rises into the air with his arms forced to be spread horizontally, mimicking the pose of the crucifix. Just then, Pyotr screams in agony while his body dissipates into a massive group of buzzing flies. While the flies buzz, a demon known as the sabbatical goat emerges from behind the altar. It is later revealed that the entire ritual was not a failed attempt because they have successfully summoned the demon and the demon was able to enter the sanatorium. The faceless demon goat looks at the church monks and shrieks loudly, shocking them. They attempt to run out of the sanatorium, but the demon stuns them in place. The church monks all freeze there while the statue of Jesus on the altar slowly turns toward the demon. It looks back at the statue of Jesus and imitates the pose of the crucifix. At the same time, the church monks levitate on their spots and are forced to stand upside down, following an inverted cross. Soon, every human being inside the sanatorium takes after the inverted cross. Outside the sanatorium, the dead flowers and trees slowly come alive. This implies that the dead would be brought back to life while the living would immediately come to die. In the end, the demon continues to empower its presence inside the sanatorium. Within a few minutes, the ceiling of the sanatorium breaks in half. The sky cracks open and is followed by a rumbling thunder, signifying how evil has returned into the earth with the new world order.